The colony ship Dandelion Seed was dying. Alarms screamed through every corridor. Red emergency lights flashed in the darkness. The ship shook so hard that Park could not stand. She crawled on her hands and knees toward the escape pods while pieces of the ceiling fell around her. She had been sleeping when the asteroid hit. One moment she was dreaming of her mother's garden back on Earth. The next moment she was flying through the air as the ship broke apart. 12 years she had spent traveling between stars, studying alien animals on distant worlds. She had seen many dangerous things, but she had never been this afraid. Reached the escape pod and pulled herself inside. Her hands were shaking so badly that she could barely press the launch button. The pod door closed. The small craft shot away from the dying ship just as the Dandelion Seed exploded into a ball of fire and metal. Through the tiny window, watched the only home she had known for 3 years disappear. 200 people had lived on that ship. Scientists, engineers, families with children. She did not know how many had escaped. She did not know if anyone else was alive. The pod fell toward the frozen moon below. 7, the surveys called it, a world of ice and snow and endless winter. The colonial company had sent the Dandelion Seed to study it before building a mining station. The surveys said the moon had no intelligent life, only animals, some of them very dangerous. Hit the surface hard. The pod bounced twice, rolled, and finally stopped against a wall of ice. Her head struck the control panel. Everything went black. When she woke, she did not know how much time had passed. Hours, maybe. Her left arm hurt terribly. When she looked at it, she saw that it was bent in a way that arms should not bend. Broken. She had a broken arm, a splitting headache, and she was alone on an alien world. Forced herself to move. She found the emergency supplies in the pod's storage compartment. Food packets that would last maybe 2 weeks, water purification tablets, a small medical kit, a knife, a broken emergency beacon that would not turn on no matter how many times she tried. She wrapped her arm as best she could, biting her lip against the pain. Then she pushed open the pod door and stepped outside. The cold hit her like a physical blow. The air was thin and sharp. The sky above was a strange purple color, and 3 small moons hung in the distance. Everything around her was white and violet. Snow covered the ground in thick layers. Strange trees with black bark and silver leaves stood in clusters across the frozen landscape. Knew she needed to find shelter. The pod was damaged and would not keep her warm for long. She needed to find water, find food, find some way to survive until rescue came, if rescue came. She started walking toward the trees. Every step was difficult. The snow was deep and her body was tired and hurt. But she kept moving. She had not survived the crash just to die in the snow. That was when she saw them. At first, she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. The creatures emerged from the trees like shadows coming to life. They were huge. Each one stood nearly 2 meters tall at the shoulder. They looked like wolves, but much bigger and much stranger. Their fur was silver blue, thick and heavy against the cold. They had 6 eyes arranged in a circle around their heads, and those eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. Stopped breathing. There were 7 of them. They spread out in a half-circle around her, blocking her path to the trees. The largest one, a male with old scars across his face, walked forward. He moved slowly, his massive paws making no sound in the snow. His 6 eyes studied her with an intelligence that made her skin feel cold in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. The surveys had called these creatures apex predators. Top of the food chain, dangerous, avoid at all costs. Had nowhere to run. Her training took over. She had spent her whole career working with alien animals. She knew that running would trigger a chase response. She knew that showing fear would make her look like prey. She knew that aggression would be seen as a challenge. So she did none of those things. Instead, she lowered her eyes. She made her body small. She stood very, very still and let the male approach. He came close enough that she could smell him. He smelled like ice and blood and something wild that had no name. The creature sniffed her. His breath was hot against her face, could see every detail of his fangs. They were longer than her forearm. One bite would kill her instantly. She waited to die. But the death did not come. The male made a low sound in his throat. It was not a growl, it was something else. Something she did not understand. He turned away from her and walked back toward the trees. The other creatures followed him. In moments, they had disappeared into the forest like ghosts. Stood alone in the snow, her heart beating so fast she thought it might explode. She did not understand what had just happened. She did not know why they had let her live. But she was alive. That was what mattered. She built her shelter that day from pieces of the crashed pod. It was small and crude, but it kept out the worst of the wind. She ate her first food packet and drank melted snow and tried to think about what to do next. The creatures watched her from the trees. She could see the faint glow of their eyes in the darkness. They did not come closer. They did not attack. They just watched. Did not sleep that night. She sat in her shelter with her knife in her hand and watched the eyes watching her. She thought about her mother's garden. She thought about the friends she had lost on the ship. She thought about how strange it was to be alive when so many others were dead. She did not know it yet, but her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. The male would become someone she trusted with her life. The pack would become her family, and this frozen moon would become her home. But that night she knew none of those things. She knew only that she was alone, she was afraid, and somewhere in the darkness the wolves were watching. 3 days passed on the frozen moon. Learned to survive. She fixed her broken arm by herself. It was the most painful thing she had ever done. She found 2 straight pieces of metal from the crashed pod and tied them to her arm with strips of cloth. She screamed when she pulled the bone back into place. The sound echoed across the empty snow, and somewhere in the distance, the wolves answered with howls of their own. Her food was running low. The emergency packets would last only 11 more days if she was careful. She melted snow for water and tried to stay warm in her small shelter. The cold was always there, always trying to kill her. She learned to keep a small fire burning at all times, using pieces of the pod for fuel. The wolves watched her. They never came close, but they never left either. She would see them at dawn, standing in the tree line like statues. She would see them at night, their 6 eyes glowing in the darkness. She started to recognize some of them. The male was always in front. He was clearly the leader, the alpha of the pack. There was an old female with fur around her muzzle, a young male with a torn ear who always seemed to be getting into trouble. Gave them names in her head. The male she called after a boy she had loved in school many years ago. The old female she called after her grandmother. It helped to name them. It made them feel less like monsters and more like animals she could understand. On the 4th morning, heard something that changed everything. It was a cry, high and sharp and full of pain. It came from somewhere past the trees, carried on the frozen wind. It sounded like a young animal in terrible trouble. Knew she should ignore it. She was weak and hurt and barely surviving. She had no business going into the forest where the wolves lived. But the cry came again, and something in her heart would not let her stay. She took her knife and walked toward the sound. The forest was beautiful in a cold and alien way. The black trees reached toward the purple sky like fingers made of shadow. Silver leaves lay on the ground in thick layers. Everything was quiet except for the distant crying. Followed the sound for nearly an hour. Her broken arm throbbed with every step. Her breath made clouds in the cold air. But she kept walking until she found the source of the noise. It was a crevasse, a deep crack in the ice, hidden by snow until you were almost on top of it. And at the bottom, maybe 3 meters down, was a wolf cub. The cub was smaller than the adults, about the size of a large earth wolf. Its fur was pale silver, almost white. It was lying on its side and could see immediately what was wrong. The cub's back leg was twisted at a terrible angle. White bone showed through the bloody fur. The cub had been trying to climb out, but every movement made the injury worse. Above her, on the ridge overlooking the crevasse, saw the pack. Was there and 6 others. They were packing back and forth, making low sounds of distress, understood at once. The crevasse walls were narrow, too narrow for the massive adult wolves to climb down. They could hear their cub crying in pain, and they could do nothing. Looked at, the alpha wolf looked back at her. For a long moment they just stared at each other. Human and alien, predator and prey, strangers on a frozen world. Then began to climb down. The walls of the crevasse were icy and slick. With only one good arm, the climb was nearly impossible. She slipped twice and almost fell. But she kept going, speaking softly the whole time in the Korean her grandmother had taught her. "It's okay," she said. "It's okay, I'm coming, don't be afraid, I'm going to help you." The cub did not understand her words, but it seemed to understand her tone. It stopped thrashing and watched her with all 6 of its eyes. When she finally reached the bottom, the cub was shaking with fear and pain, but it did not attack. Knelt beside it slowly. The leg was very bad. Without proper treatment, the cub would die. The bone was broken in 2 places, and infection would set in soon. She had nothing except her small medical kit and her own torn clothing, but she had to try. The cub bit her when she touched its leg. Sharp teeth sank into her good arm and blood ran down onto the ice. Did not pull away. She kept talking softly, kept her movements slow and gentle. After a moment, the cub let go. It bit her again when she started to set the bone. This time did cry out, but she did not stop. She pulled the broken pieces of bone back into alignment while the cub screamed. She cleaned the wound with the last of her antiseptic. She made a splint from strips of her jacket and bound it tight around the leg. When she was done, the cub was exhausted. It lay still, breathing hard, but the terrible angle of its leg was fixed. It would live. If nothing went wrong, it would walk again. Now had to get it out. The cub was not heavy, but climbing with one arm and an injured animal was almost impossible. Tied the cub to her back with more strips from her jacket. She climbed slowly, her fingers numb from the cold, her muscles screaming. Twice she almost fell. Twice she somehow held on. When she finally pulled herself over the edge, the pack was waiting. Stood only 3 meters away. His 6 eyes moved from to the cub on her back. The other wolves gathered close, sniffing at the wounded cub, making soft sounds that might have been concern. Untied the cub and laid it gently on the snow. It whimpered once and tried to lick its wounded leg, but it was too tired to move much. Stepped forward, his heart stopped. This was the moment. Would he thank her? Would he kill her? She had no idea what the wolves would do. The alpha lowered his massive head. He pressed his nose against bloody hand. He breathed in her scent, and she breathed in his. Then he did something she had never seen any animal do. He bowed. His head dipped low and his 6 eyes closed for a moment. It was a gesture of something she did not have a word for. Gratitude, maybe, or respect, or something deeper that humans had no name for. When raised his head, he turned and walked toward the trees. The pack followed, 2 of them carefully carrying the wounded cub between them. At the edge of the forest, stopped and looked back at. He waited. Understood, it was an invitation, a welcome into something she did not fully understand. Her logical mind told her it was dangerous. Her survival instincts screamed at her to go back to her shelter. But she had just saved one of their children. They had watched her bleed for their cub, and now they were offering her something she had not felt since the crash. A place to belong. Walked into the forest with the wolves. The pack's den was hidden deep in the forest, inside a cave that opened at the base of a frozen cliff. Warm air rose from deep underground, heated by the planet's core. For the first time since the crash, felt truly warm. There were 15 wolves in the pack. She counted them that first night as they settled into the cave around her. The alpha took his place at the entrance where he could watch for danger. The old female curled up near the back with the youngest pups. The others spread out across the rocky floor, a family of silver-blue fur and glowing eyes. The cub had saved was named something she could not pronounce. It was a sound like a growl mixed with a clicking noise that came from deep in the throat. Could not make that sound, so she gave the cub her own name. It meant lily in Korean, and the cub's pale fur reminded of the white flowers her mother grew in their garden on Earth. His mother was dead, learned this over the following days by watching the pack. There was an empty space in the den where a wolf should have been sleeping. The pack avoided that spot as if it hurt to look at. Sometimes stood there at night, staring at nothing, his 6 eyes clouded with something that looked very much like grief. The wolves mourned. They felt loss and sadness just like humans did. This simple truth changed something in his heart. She was not living with animals. She was living with people. Different people with different bodies and different ways, but people all the same. The first week was hard. Did not know the pack's rules. She made many mistakes. Once she tried to take food from the common pile without waiting, and a young male named snapped at her so fast she barely pulled her hand back in time. Stepped between them and cuffed hard across the face. The young wolf rolled twice and slunk away with his ears flat against his head. Learned that there was an order to feeding. The alpha ate first, then the mothers with pups, then the hunters, then the young ones. She was not sure where she fit, so she waited until everyone else had eaten. The pack seemed to accept this. She learned other things too. She learned that the wolves had a complex language of sounds, postures, and small movements. A raised tail meant confidence or challenge. Ears back meant fear or submission. The rumbling sound they made in their chests was something like laughter. The high keening cry was grief or pain. Taught her where to find food. He led her to underground streams where strange fish swam in the warm water. He showed her roots that grew beneath the snow, thick and filling and safe to eat. He waited patiently while she dug them up with her clumsy human hands, never rushing her, never showing frustration. A shy female named began following everywhere. Was young, maybe the wolf equivalent of a teenager. She had soft fur and eyes that were more blue than the others. At first she kept her distance, watching from behind trees and rocks. Then she started sleeping near Spot in the cave. Then she started bringing gifts. Small dead animals, mostly, birds with bright feathers, things that looked like rabbits but had 6 legs, would drop them at its feet and wait with obvious hope for approval. Always thanked her even when the gifts were bloody and strange. It seemed to make very happy. Healed slowly, checked the cub's leg every day, cleaning the wound with water and changing the bandages. The bone was setting well. In a few more weeks would be able to walk without pain, maybe even run. The cub followed everywhere just like Did, but where was shy and careful was bold and playful. She nipped its heels. She stole things and ran away, looking back with what could only be a grin. She curled up against at night, her small body warm and soft. When food packets finally ran out, she did not know how she would survive. She could eat the roots had shown her, but they were not enough. She needed protein. She needed real food. That morning came to her with a freshly killed ice hare. The cub dropped it at its feet and sat back, tail wagging, eyes bright with pride. It was the first thing it caught since her injury. She had gone out before dawn to hunt, dragging her healing leg through the snow just to bring this gift. Sat in the snow and cried. She cried for her lost friends on the dandelion seed. She cried for her mother's garden that she would never see again. She cried because she was alone on an alien world, and a small wolf cub had just shown her more kindness than some humans she had known. Did not understand the tears. She pressed her nose against face and made worried sounds. Came running to see what was wrong. Even Old limped over, concern in her ancient eyes. They did not know why the human was leaking water from her face, but they knew she was hurting, and they stayed with her until the hurt went away. By the end of the 2nd month, was no longer a stranger living with the pack. She was part of them. She hunted with them, using traps and snares since she had no teeth or claws. She stood watch with them when dangerous sounds came from the darkness. She learned their language piece by piece until she could understand simple messages and even speak a few words back. The pack had a name for her. She heard them use it when they thought she was not listening. It was a sound that meant something like bare skin or no fur. But it was not an insult. It was spoken with warmth, with affection, with something close to love. She was different from them. She would always be different. She was small and weak and slow. She had only 2 eyes and no fangs. She needed fire to stay warm and could not smell prey from a distance. But she was pack, she was family. One night came to sit beside her at the cave entrance. He did not speak, because wolves did not speak the way humans did. But he pressed his shoulder against hers, and they watched the 3 moons rise together over the frozen forest. It was enough. For the first time since the crash, felt like she was home. The warning came on a cold morning when the purple sky was heavy with clouds. Returned from his dawn patrol with blood on his fur and fear in his eyes. Had never seen him afraid before. The alpha gathered the pack with a series of sharp barks, and every wolf came running. Even the pups, even Old, even with her still healing leg. Something was wrong, something was coming. Did not understand the words used, but she understood the feeling. The whole pack was terrified. Mothers gathered their pups close. Young hunters paced back and forth with their ears flat. Even who was always brave and sometimes foolish looked like he wanted to run. Over the next few hours, learned about the shrikes. They were not from this moon. The wolves had legends about them, stories passed down through generations. The shrikes came from deep underground, from caves that went down to the planet's heart. They slept for years at a time. But when they woke, they were hungry, and nothing could stop them. The shrikes were insects. Giant insects bigger than wolves with hard shells and sharp claws and jaws that could bite through bone. They hunted in swarms of 20 or 30. A single shrike could kill an adult wolf. A swarm could destroy an entire pack. Had found their tracks that morning. The shrikes were moving toward pack territory. They would arrive in 2 days, maybe less. The pack prepared for war. Every wolf who could fight was called to defend the den. Even wounded wolves, even those too young or too old for battle. They sharpened their claws on rocks. They practiced fighting moves that had been passed down for generations. They said goodbye to the ones they loved, just in case. watched all this with growing fear. She had no claws to sharpen, she had no fangs to bear. She was the weakest member of the pack by far. In a battle against the Shrikes, she would be useless, worse than useless. She would be a target. But she could not run. She would not run. This was her family now. These wolves had saved her life and given her a home. She would not abandon them. That night, while the pack slept, went back to her crashed escape pod. It had been 2 months since she last visited. Snow had buried most of it, but the fuel cells were still there, half full of the chemicals that had powered the pod's engines. The emergency flares were still there, bright red tubes that could burn hot enough to melt steel. And her tools were still there, the small kit she had used to Set's leg and fix her own broken arm. Worked through the night. Her hands were clumsy with cold and she made many mistakes, but by dawn she had built something. The fuel cells became bombs. Small ones, not very powerful, but strong enough to collapse a cave ceiling or start a fire. The flares became weapons, attached to long poles that could throw fire across a distance. She made traps too, pits covered with thin ice and sharpened sticks at the bottom. She made ropes and nets and everything else she could think of. She was not strong like the wolves. She was not fast or fierce, but humans had survived for thousands of years by being clever, and was very clever. She returned to the pack with her weapons as the sun rose. The wolves gathered around her, sniffing at the strange things she carried. Tilted his head, his 6 eyes studying the bombs and the fire throwers and the other tools of war. Did not know how to explain, so she showed them instead. She took them to a narrow canyon near the pack's territory. This was where the Shrikes would come. She pointed at the canyon walls and mimed them falling. She showed them the traps she would build and the fire she would throw. The wolves did not understand everything, but they understood enough. When the sun set that night, stood with the pack at the canyon entrance. Was on her right. Now strong enough to walk on her heeled legs, stood on her left. Behind them were the hunters and the fighters and everyone who could hold a line. A young wolf named pressed his flank against side. He had not liked her at first. He had growled at her and snapped at her and made it clear she did not belong. But now he stood beside her, his shoulder touching hers, ready to fight together. Minyu, the fastest runner in the pack, positioned himself at her back. He would protect her from anything that got too close. He had told her this without words, just by the way he stood and the way he watched her. They waited. The Shrikes came with the darkness. Heard them before she saw them, a clicking, chittering sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then she saw the first shapes moving in the shadows, hard shells that reflected the moonlight, legs that moved too fast, jaws that opened sideways instead of up and down. There were at least 30 of them, maybe more. Howled and the pack howled with him. It was not a cry of fear. It was a challenge, a declaration of war. We are here, the howl said. We are not afraid. Come and face us. The Shrikes charged. Threw her first bomb at the canyon walls. The explosion was smaller than she had hoped, but it was enough. Rocks tumbled down, blocking part of the canyon, forcing the swarm into a narrow space where they could not spread out. The wolves roared their approval. The Shrikes kept coming. They climbed over the rocks and poured through the gaps. Lit her first flare and threw it into their midst. Fire blossomed in the darkness. Shrikes screamed as they burned. The smell of burning chitin filled the air. Then the wolves attacked. Had never seen anything so beautiful or so terrifying. The pack fought like a single creature, moving together, covering each other, never leaving anyone alone. Led the charge, his massive jaws crushing Shrike shells like they were made of paper. Fought with the fury of a grandmother protecting her family, older but no less deadly. Even was there, limping but brave, biting at anything that came near. Fought too, she threw fire and swung her sharpened pole and screamed Korean curses that would have made her grandmother faint. A Shrike came at her from the side. Was there in an instant, tearing its head off before it could reach her. Another Shrike got too close, shoved her fire thrower into its face and watched it burn. The battle lasted for hours, or maybe it lasted for minutes. Time stopped making sense. There was only the fighting and the fire and the desperate need to survive. When it was over, 11 Shrikes lay dead in the canyon. The rest had fled back into the darkness, their hunger not worth the cost. But the pack had lost too. Lay still at the canyon entrance. He had been the first to charge, the first to meet the Shrike swarm head-on. He had bought the others time with his life. Remembered how he had always shared his food with her, always made room for her by the fire. Was dead too. She had thrown herself in front of 3 pups when a Shrike broke through the line. She had saved them, but she had not saved herself. The pack carried their dead back to the den in silence. That night they sang. It was not a howl of victory. It was a song of mourning, of grief, of love for those who were gone. The sound rose up to the frozen stars and echoed across the empty moon. Sang with them, she did not know the words, but she knew the feeling. She had lost people too, she understood. When the song ended, came to stand beside her. He was wounded with deep cuts across his shoulder and face. But he was alive. They were all alive, the ones who remained. The Alpha pressed his forehead against. It was a gesture she had never seen before. It meant something important, something sacred. You are one of us, the gesture said. You fought with us, you bled with us, you are pack. Closed her eyes and let the tears fall. She was home. 6 months had passed since the crash of the dandelion seed. 6 months since Park had fallen from the stars and landed on this frozen moon. 6 months since she had been alone and afraid and certain she would die. She was not alone anymore. The pack had grown since the battle with the Shrikes. New pups had been born in the spring thaw. Young wolves from other packs had come to join them, drawn by stories of the strange, bare-skinned creature who threw fire and fought like one of them. The den was full of life and warmth and the sounds of family. Had changed, too. Her broken arm had healed, though it still ached on cold mornings. She had learned to hunt with the pack, using traps and her sharp human eyes to spot prey the wolves might miss. She had learned their language well enough to have simple conversations. She had earned her place. Had grown into a strong young wolf. Her leg had healed completely, and she could run as fast as any hunter in the pack. She still followed everywhere, still brought her gifts, still curled up beside her at night. They had a bond that went deeper than words. It was a morning like any other when the ship appeared. Was gathering roots near the river when she heard it. A sound she had not heard in half a year. The roar of engines, the hum of power cells, the unmistakable noise of human technology. She looked up and saw it. A ship coming down through the purple clouds. It had the markings of the Colonial Authority. A rescue ship sent to search for survivors of the crash. They had come for her. Ran back to the den. The pack was already in chaos. The ship's noise had frightened them. Pups were crying, mothers were gathering their young, hunters were packing with their fur standing on end. They did not know what this strange thing was. They only knew it was loud and dangerous. Stood at the den entrance watching the ship descend. He was old now, his muzzle, his movements slower than before. But he was still the Alpha, he was still the leader. Stood beside him. Together they watched the ship land in the clearing beyond the trees. The hatch opened. Humans stepped out. They wore environmental suits and carried weapons. Their leader was a tall man with a hard face and military posture. He scanned the forest with suspicious eyes, his hand on his gun. Then he saw. His eyes went wide. He stared at her like she was a ghost. She supposed she must look strange to him. Her clothes were torn and patched with wolf fur. Her hair had grown long and wild. She stood beside a massive alien predator like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Survivor," the man said into his radio. His voice was tight with shock. "We have a survivor, one of the colonists from the dandelion seed." He walked toward her. His soldiers followed, their weapons raised at the pack, saw their fear in the way they moved. They saw monsters, threats, dangerous animals to be neutralized. "Ma'am," the man said. His name tag read Captain. "I'm Captain, Colonial Rescue Authority. We've been searching for survivors for months. You're the first we've found." Nodded, she did not trust her voice to speak. "We need to get you out of here," Captain continued. "These creatures are classified as apex predators, extremely dangerous. My team will cover you while you—" "No." The word came out stronger than expected. Captain stopped. He stared at her with confusion. "Ma'am." "They're not dangerous," said. "They saved my life. They're my family." Captain looked at. The old Alpha looked back. 6 eyes studied the human soldier with an intelligence that could not be. "Ma'am, I understand you've been through a traumatic experience, but these animals—" "They're not animals," his voice was firm. "They mourn their dead, they love their children, they have language and culture and history. They're people, Captain, different from us, but people." One of the soldiers raised his weapon toward, moved without thinking. She stepped between the soldier and the Alpha, putting her body in the line of fire. "You'll have to go through me," she said. Appeared at her side. The young wolf was no longer a cub. She was nearly as large as now, and her eyes burned with fierce loyalty. She bared her teeth at the soldiers, ready to fight and die for the human who had saved her life. The soldiers hesitated. They had expected to find a frightened survivor, grateful to be rescued. Instead, they had found something else entirely. A woman who had become part of an alien pack. A woman who was willing to die to protect them. Captain studied for a long moment. He saw the scars on her arms, the wolf fur sewn into her clothing, the easy way she stood among creatures that should have killed her. He saw something he did not understand. But he was a soldier, and soldiers know when to stop fighting. He lowered his weapon. The others followed. "All right," he said slowly. "Tell me everything." She told him about the crash, about's broken leg, about the battle with the Shrikes. She told him about's leadership and's wisdom and shy friendship. She spoke for hours while the sun moved across the purple sky. When she finished, Captain was silent for a long time. "The colonial authority will want to study them," he said finally. "They'll want to classify them, catalog them, probably build a research station." "I know," said, "that's why I'm staying." Captain raised an eyebrow. "Staying?" "Someone needs to speak for them. Someone needs to make sure the authority doesn't hurt them. I'm the only human who knows their language. I'm the only one they trust." Looked at the pack watching from the trees. "They're my family. I won't abandon them." Captain was quiet for another long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "I'll tell the authority what I found here," he said. "I'll tell them these creatures are sentient, that they deserve protection, not study. I can't promise they'll listen, but I'll try." Smiled. It was the first time she had smiled at a human in 6 months. "Thank you, Captain." The rescue ship left that afternoon, watched it rise through the clouds and disappear into the stars. Then she turned and walked back to the den. Was waiting for her. The old Alpha pressed his forehead against hers just as he had done after the battle with the Shrikes. "Welcome home," the gesture said. "You are Pack. You are one of us." Bounded up, her tail wagging, her eyes bright with joy. The young wolf had been afraid the strange flying thing would take her human away. Now she understood that had chosen to stay. Licked face and made the rumbling sound that meant happiness. The pack gathered around them, old and wise and proud, no longer young and foolish but a strong hunter, still shy but braver than before. Minyu and all the others who had fought beside in the canyon. They sang that night, not a song of mourning but a song of celebration, a song of family and home and belonging. The sound rose up to the 3 moons and echoed across the frozen world. And in the song, there was a new verse. A verse about a strange creature who fell from the stars. A creature with no fur and only 2 eyes. A creature who healed the wounded and fought beside the pack and chose to stay when she could have left. The bare-skinned one, the song said, the one from the sky, she is not wolf, but she is pack, she is ours. She is one of us. Listened to the song and felt tears on her cheeks. She had lost so much. Her ship, her friends, her whole life among the stars. But she had found something too, something she had been searching for without knowing it. A place where she belonged. She would spend the rest of her years on this frozen moon. She would teach humans about the wolves and teach wolves about humans. She would build bridges between worlds. And when her time finally came, she would be buried in the den, beside and in all the others who had welcomed her as family. The bare-skinned one, the healer, the fighter. One of them. One of us.